For the past 10 episodes, we have chased the flow of power across the artificial intelligence ecosystem. We started at the power plant, rode the transmission grid, waited in line for the transformers, and eventually arrived at the liquid-cooled GPUs inside the data center.
We have talked about the brilliant engineering required to make all of that happen. But the reality is that every single piece of that multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure, every chip, every gas turbine, every cooling manifold, is completely inert without four fundamental things that we literally have to dig out of the ground.
Welcome back to the Working Thesis. Today, we are going to the very bottom of the AI supply chain. We are leaving the pristine server rooms and heading into the mines, the smelters, and the foundries.
We are looking at the physical inputs: copper, aluminum, uranium, and steel. Because if you want to understand the true speed limit of the AI revolution, you have to understand the raw earth elements that make it physically possible. One small thing up front: we genuinely love these companies as stories, but we're explaining them, not recommending them.
So treat all of this as food for your own thinking, not financial advice. Stay curious, stay a little skeptical, and make your own calls. When analysts talk about the physical requirements of the AI build-out, they often use a blanket term. They just call them materials or commodities, as if they are all just interchangeable ingredients in a recipe.
But that is a massive oversimplification. Copper, aluminum, uranium, and steel are not interchangeable. They represent four completely different links in the supply chain. They face four different types of bottlenecks, and they operate on four completely different clocks.
You cannot swap one for the other to solve a shortage. If you don't have the uranium, the reactor goes dark. If you don't have the specialized steel, the transformer cannot step down the voltage.
We love the gold rush analogy on this show. Well, if the semiconductor designers and the utility companies are selling the shovels for the AI gold rush, the metals and mining industries are selling the shovels beneath the shovels. And right now, those foundational tools are becoming incredibly hard to find.
Let's start with copper. It is the undisputed king of the electrify-everything movement. While we often think of copper in the context of the broader grid, in the AI story, copper primarily lives inside the walls.
It is the critical conductor inside the data center. It is in the heavy power distribution units, the generator windings, the transformer coils, and the dense building wiring that routes the electricity directly to the server racks.
To understand the scale of the demand, look at the density. A conventional, old-style data center uses roughly 10 to 15 tons of copper per megawatt of capacity. But a next-generation AI data center is so power-dense that it requires on the order of 30 to 50 tons of copper per megawatt.
If you extrapolate that out to the massive 1 gigawatt AI campuses currently being planned by the hyperscalers, a single campus can require up to roughly 50,000 tons of copper. That is several times the footprint of a traditional data center, and roughly equivalent to the copper you would find in 500,000 cars.
That exponential leap in demand is crashing into a very stubborn supply reality. Analysts widely expect a structural copper deficit emerging right now. We are looking at a shortfall on the order of a few 100,000 tons in 2026, and it is widening.
If you look further out, the projections are staggering. S&P Global has projected that the copper shortfall could approach roughly 10 million tons a year by the mid-2030s to 2040. And more than 70% of the incremental copper demand this decade is driven by the broader energy transition. EVs, the grid, renewables. AI is just the newest, heaviest slice on top of that pie.
You cannot just flip a switch to solve a copper deficit. Discovering, permitting, and building a new copper mine typically takes 10 to 15 years, and the existing supply is incredibly fragile.
For an illustrative example of that fragility, look at Freeport-McMoRan, one of the world's largest listed pure-play copper miners. In September 2025, they suffered a massive mud rush accident at their giant Grasberg mine in Indonesia. That single geological event cut that unit's copper sales by more than 70% year over year.
The company doesn't expect a full recovery at that site until around mid-2027. One accident on the other side of the world, and a massive chunk of global supply vanished overnight. That is the precarious reality of the copper squeeze. Moving from the data center back out to the grid, we hit our next metal, and it involves a very counterintuitive fact. We touched on this in an earlier episode, those massive, long-haul overhead power lines connecting the country. They're not made of copper.
They are mostly made of aluminum. Specifically, they use a wire called ACSR, which stands for aluminum conductor steel reinforced. Aluminum is the surprise conductor of the infrastructure build-out.
The physics dictate the choice. Aluminum is about 1/3 the weight of copper and is significantly cheaper. While copper is more conductive, aluminum is conductive enough for long spans, and its lightweight means the giant transmission towers don't collapse under the strain.
Copper stays underground and inside the buildings. Aluminum hangs in the sky. So aluminum demand is directly and intimately levered to the national grid and the long-distance transmission build-out, which, as we know, is one of the primary bottlenecks of the entire AI revolution.
But the aluminum market is currently navigating an incredibly complex geopolitical and regulatory maze. Supply is already tight due to ongoing restrictions on Russian metals and various global supply chain disruptions.
Because of these pressures, some analysts see aluminum prices trending up around 10% or more through 2026. But the massive wildcard for aluminum right now isn't just organic demand, it is tariffs.
In June 2026, we saw the implementation of tiered Section 232 tariffs in the United States. We are talking about tariffs of roughly 50% on primary aluminum, 25% on many derivatives, and a temporary 15% tariff on certain metal-intensive and grid equipment through 2027. There is even a 10% tariff on some U.S. origin metal coming back into the country.
It is a double-edged sword. For domestic producers, like Alcoa, for example, it lifts their U.S. domestic pricing power by walling off cheap imports. But for the engineering firms and utilities sourcing metal abroad to build the grid, it acts as a massive, tangible tax on construction. Aluminum is a commodity, and right now, it is being completely whipsawed by trade policy.
This brings us to the third input, which we discussed heavily during our nuclear episode, uranium. This is the bedrock fuel required to generate the clean, 24/7 baseload power that the hyperscalers desperately want.
The uranium market has undergone a fundamental psychological shift. For years, the spot price languished. But today, spot prices sit around $85 a pound. More importantly, the long-term contracts that utilities sign are running even higher, roughly in the $100 to $115 range.
That premium on long-term contracts tells you everything you need to know about the market. Utilities and data center operators are no longer trying to squeeze producers for the lowest possible price. They are prioritizing supply security above all else.
And the massive power purchase agreements, or PPAs, being signed directly by hyperscalers to secure nuclear energy are acting as a brand new, structural pillar of demand for uranium that simply did not exist a few years ago.
The macro setup for uranium is immense. There are roughly 75 reactors currently under construction globally, with over 120 more planned. Simultaneously, Western sanctions on Russian-enriched uranium are forcing buyers to fiercely compete for Western-aligned supply.
This gives Western producers multi-year contract visibility. And within this space, we are seeing rare examples of vertical integration. Take Cameco, for instance. They are a massive uranium miner, but they also own a roughly 49% stake in Westinghouse alongside Brookfield.
That is an incredible strategic moat. They have linked the extraction of the fuel at the mine directly to the reactor technology and services that actually burn it. Very few entities in the world can match that end-to-end integration.
Of all four inputs we are discussing today, uranium arguably has the longest runway and the lowest fragility. However, the realization of this nuclear renaissance is a late 2020s to 2030s story. If the immediate AI power trade cools, uranium equities can still be highly volatile in the near term.
Finally, we return to the quietest, but perhaps most critical bottleneck of them all, steel. But not the structural steel used to build skyscrapers. We are talking about grain-oriented electrical steel, or GOES.
As we highlighted in episode 4, GOES is the specialized, highly engineered steel that makes up the magnetic cores of power transformers. The shortage of this specific steel is directly tied to those agonizing 128-week lead times for new grid equipment.
Domestically, the production of GOES is practically a near monopoly. One prominent industry newsmaker in this space is Cleveland-Cliffs, which controls the vast majority of the domestic supply.
This specific steel is the highest torque, but also the higher risk proxy for the transformer shortage. It is a much smaller, more speculative market compared to global copper, and it remains highly cyclical, heavily exposed to broader steel prices and automotive demand.
So when you look at the foundation of the AI power problem, the biggest mistake you can make is lumping these four inputs together. They operate on four completely different clocks.
Uranium has the longest runway and the lowest fragility. It is incredibly hard to substitute, and the industry is protected by vertical moats, but it requires the patience of a decade.
Copper is entirely non-substitutable for internal wiring, but its clock is excruciatingly slow. It takes 10 to 15 years to permit a mine, making it highly cyclical and deeply exposed to single mine shocks, like we saw at Grasberg.
Aluminum is directly levered to the expansion of the transmission grid, giving it a massive structural tailwind, but it is a commodity currently being whipsawed by tariffs and geopolitics.
And specialized electrical steel acts as a near-monopoly choke point for the transformers, but it remains a tiny, speculative slice of the much broader, highly cyclical, heavy steel industry. Different bottlenecks, different cycles, different clocks. For anyone following the money out of Silicon Valley and into the physical world, it is crucial to look at this landscape honestly, from both sides. The bull case for these raw inputs is rooted in the laws of physics.
The bulls argue that you simply cannot substitute these materials, and you cannot build new supply quickly. As the AI trade broadens from writing software models to pouring concrete and laying wire, these represent genuine, durable bottlenecks that have immense pricing power.
But the bear case is equally grounded in reality. These are ultimately cyclical commodity markets. They are highly sensitive to China's macroeconomic health and broader global GDP growth. They are vulnerable to sudden tariff regime changes and single-asset disasters like mine collapses.
Furthermore, because the market is well aware of the AI backlog, many of these companies carry rich valuations today. The money has already quietly flowed here as investors looked past the silicon. They are priced for a perfect infrastructure rollout, and in the physical world, rollouts are rarely perfect. The cycle cuts both ways.
And that brings us to the bedrock of our investigation. Beneath the trillion-dollar language models, beneath the liquid cooling pipes, and beneath the gas turbines, there is just the Earth.
The entire artificial intelligence revolution rests on a foundation of copper, aluminum, uranium, and steel. These elements must be discovered, dug, smelted, and shaped on a decade-long clock that the software world simply cannot speed up with a line of code.
The story of AI is, at its absolute foundation, a physical world story. We're trying to build the most ethereal technology in human history using the heaviest, oldest industries we have.
This isn't the end of the AI power problem. It is just the deepest layer of the puzzle we have uncovered so far. The grid keeps shifting, the metals keep moving, and the models keep growing. The series continues, and we will be here to track the physical limits of the digital mind. See you next time. And that's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you, genuinely, for spending part of your day thinking this through with us.
The whole idea of this show is pretty simple. We hold a handful of theses about the world, and we test them out loud, together, a little more each day. No crystal balls, just curiosity, and a willingness to be wrong.
So, if that's your kind of thing, stick around for the next one, and tell us where we're getting it wrong. Honestly, the pushback is our favorite part.
Until next time, take care of yourself, and keep asking good questions.